Good morning, everybody. It is Cowboy here. It is Friday, and this is the show that you have all been waiting for. In fact, I think people are waiting for this show more than they're waiting for like the next, I don't know, the next season of anything. Veles is back, and the world is still intact. Usually, Veles, when you leave town, like things always happen, and I think things must have happened in secret. You must have kept the war small. But we're so glad to have you back. And I know you've probably been stacking up data for the whole time you've been gone. You and I have talked in the background. I know it to be true. But as V would say, he's the dark raven of the deep state. This guy has been there, done that, and he's here to tell you about it. Veles, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, my friend, and it's good to be back and good to be with you. And we are hoping that V will pop in here in a moment. Do you have anything, sir, or shall I just fire off?
No, fire off. I mean, it's just fire off, fellas. It's what we need. It's what we want. And I don't think there's anything I could bring at this point that could compare.
Okay, thank you. So very glad to be back with all of you after roughly 2 weeks in Europe. We've got so much to cover. So as usual, for those of you wishing to join us on the Discord channel, you can reach out to me or us at the following email, and that's 1917VELES@gmail.com. Again, 1917 Victor Echo Lima Echo Sierra @gmail.com. Equally, if you have a comment or a question about any of our programs, feel free to reach out. I do check that mailbox fairly frequently. And please also remember to visit algofactory.tech as well and give Algo some love. That is correct. It's algofactory.tech, correct?
That is correct. There's a link in the description with a free algo that I put together for everybody. So feel free to use that as well.
And then equally, please, include Gus Demos and his company, perpetualassets.com, if you'd like to also explore other exciting options in your lives. So, pennies, it's no joke. They're phasing out the production of pennies in 2026. Let me say that again. The United States is removing pennies from our currency. I realize the media is saying very little about this, and you're only reminded of it when you're in places like grocery stores who may have some signage up telling you that. For the enterprising among you, pennies minted before 1980 are mostly copper versus those that were minted after that are mostly zinc with a coating of copper. I'm aware of the penalties for defacing U.S. currency, and I'm not endorsing anyone deface U.S. currency. I'm just saying pennies minted before 1980 are higher in copper, and copper's paying well these days. And this also relates to a comment in a moment about price inflation in our lives. With the upcoming removal of the penny, many organizations, not just businesses, are, yes, rounding up prices to the nearest nickel. Just a heads up. Operational security, or OPSEC, as it's called in the defense community, and best practices. Today's password is Louvre. Or more accurately, the password for the security camera system at the Louvre Museum in France, who was robbed, was Louvre. It's no joke. You can't make this up.
Oh, good God.
Sorry, folks. Algo's a few hours behind me. It takes a little bit.
I'm sorry. I please go ahead, fellas.
Yes. So in the same realm, and I'm glad Algo's here. I wish V was to hear this next one. Hot on CNBC yesterday is the following. A startup company called 1Password, the number one and the word password, has reached $400 million in annual recurring revenue, or ARR. So why am I even mentioning this? Because the biggest backers of the company are Ryan Reynolds, Matthew McConaughey, and Scarlett Johansson.
Oh, the paragon of OPSEC.
Yes. This is a press conference. In the old TV show MASH, there's a scene where an angry general says, "This is a press conference. The last thing I want to do is answer a bunch of questions." During a recent news conference, a Nova News Service reporter from Italy asked the EU chief spokesperson the following, and I quote, "You've said previously Russia should pay for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Do you believe Israel should pay for the reconstruction of Gaza?" The EU spokesperson said, "I have no comment." I'm dead serious. That reporter Gabriel Nunziati, was immediately fired by his news organization. Oh, and there's this related item. There's a book called The Assassination of James Forrestal, who I've not read but was recommended to me. It came out around 2021. There are those who believe, for those of you who know who Forrestal was, who believe that Forrestal was killed because he knew about aliens at Roswell. There are others who say he knew about the nuclear bomber program and biological weapons testing, of whom Roswell was a cover story. This book argues Forrestal, among others, was killed because he opposed the creation of the State of Israel. I find such discussion in all three of those theories healthy. Let the facts speak for themselves. Res ipsa loquitur, for you fans of Latin.
Oh, is that the speaker? No.
No,
Speaker something.
that's let the facts speak for themselves.
Fact. Okay.
Latin. No kings. My thanks to Errant Apparent for this one. To all the No Kings protesters, then explain your support for a big government socialist running New York City. Speaking of big government, the deputy director of Massachusetts governor was busted on October 29th with 8 kilos of cocaine. For you non-metric people, that's about 17 and a half pounds of cocaine. But not just 8 kilos of cocaine. 8 kilos of cocaine they were storing in the governor's office. But go ahead, Massachusetts, raise taxes again in the name of the people in big government. Is it me, or is the room getting smaller? In the classic dark film Brazil, there's a scene where the hero of the story is promoted to a senior position in a future bureaucratic hellscape. He then notices his office is progressively getting smaller moment by moment because the company needs more room. We've had a theme on Rogue during the last year, pointing out the ever-increasing prices of meat and the massive drop in our cattle herds. Lately, I've noticed hamburgers at various locations have shrunk to about the size of a White Castle slider, for those of you who know what those are. There were times in ancient societies when meat was so precious or hard to get a hold of, you basically had a bowl of vegetables with a little meat in it. Or in the case of Italy, a bowl of noodles with varyingly sized meatball to accompany your noodles. I do wonder how much longer till we reach that point. Straight out of the book and the consulting outfit by the same name, Freakonomics, is the constant reminder about disinformation and the truth. Yes, U.S. cattle herds are the smallest they've been since the 1950s. You may be surprised to know the reason your beef prices are high is only partially due to that fact. You see, much of the beef in the United States comes out of Argentina and Canada. Meat is a commodity like copper, and U.S. beef, because of its quality, is often not sold in the U.S. Thanks for that, Elgo. It's being shipped to Europe where they'll pay a premium. There was a news story recently saying certain sandwich places, after purchase by private equity, were ordered to, this is no joke, to slice meat as thin as possible to save money. I'm reminded of the Wendy's ad campaign from the 1980s because Algo read my mind. Where's the beef? Here's a foreshadow question. Some of you may have noticed in certain parts of the United States, the price of pumpkins was absurdly high around Halloween. So what do you think a turkey's going to go for around Thanksgiving? Perhaps you want to buy one today or a ham and freeze it before they hose you again. Equally, the turkey may be the size of a quail by the time we get to Thanksgiving. Movies. Upon review of the upcoming movies for 2026, I can confirm what I said on an earlier program. We've got nothing. I'm dead serious. It's all crap. We got a bunch of remakes, the 6th or 7th version of some franchise, and the occasional small production studio film with a cast of people you've never heard of. Although in the case of the latter, that may not be a bad thing. If our overlords are switching to cable and streaming services, I wish they would tell us. Magic Kingdom. We've had, at last count, 4+ people kill themselves at Walt Disney World or its associated properties the last few months. It begs the question of whether there are others who have not been reported. I'm not trying to go down any rabbit holes, and yes, people do at times take their lives at places who made them happy or were sentimental. In fact, there's a behind-the-scenes effort at all the Disney parks to prevent families from dumping the ashes of their loved ones at the park. That's a real thing, and particularly the Haunted Mansion ride. To my knowledge, we've never had this many people die at the parks in such short succession. The Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, well, sadly, that's been going on for years. But Walt Disney World? I don't know. I wonder if there's more going on there than we've been told. The U.S. government budget, for those of you that did this one, There are untraditional aspects to why the budget battle is ongoing right now, not the least of which is there's a conflict of attrition between two sides among many who simply cannot move from their positions. From a date perspective, a date to keep in mind is the 21st of November, which is two Fridays from now. That's prior to Thanksgiving and the break for government representatives. Second, the continuing resolution date is the 21st, and it may force people to resolve it. Third, what, if any, impacts from Tuesday's elections may contribute to resolving the budget. My simplified take is the stakes this time are higher than previous budget battles, and this may still stretch out. Equally, your airline flights will continue to be affected until it is. Bear with me just a moment. There we go. Executive focus. KPMG released a study indicating around 70+% of CEOs are focused on the impact of tariffs in 2025 and leveraging AI in 2026. To me, this is one of the worst examples of bandwagoning and failure in thinking. There was a time when I needed to listen to stockholder calls, and the finance folks in those calls are ruthless. Whenever executives would go down the road of, well, we're running into problems because of the economy, or there's an uncertain future, those same analysts would nail them on there still being a range of actions available. For so many executives to say everything right now is tariffs and everything tomorrow is our effectiveness in deploying AI solution leaves me scratching my head. Yes, the tariffs have had an impact nationally, and I've spoken to many who have felt it on a deeply personal level. It's unclear whether the AI soundbite is just more of the same behavior we've seen in corporate leadership. What I mean by that is the constant setting of impossible expectations who've been behind all the turnover for the last 2 years in C-level executives and vice presidents. Executives leave because they realize they have no chance of hitting their bonus structure based on changing targets. Another old favorite taking place right now, following all the cost cutting, is buying back stock. In the end, I fear it's going to be more cost cutting who will be claimed was achieved due to AI, but there won't be any sort of audit to prove, in fact, it was AI who achieved those results. European food. I have a lot about Europe in today's program. I'll start by saying that, after many years on this earth and high-stress jobs, Veles does take some medication for some things. I have to say that once again, much as my experience has been in South America or when I was in Europe last summer, within 48 hours of eating nothing but European food, practically none of my medications were needed. Now, granted, I was in places with very, managed meals and of size and a lot of walking and hiking, but headaches, body pain, and the usual were simply gone. Now, I know many of you out there in the health-focused world will be shaking your head saying, well, of course. I'm not denying that, and I do watch my diet here in the United States as much as I can, along with an exercise regimen. However, the obvious nature of what's in our food versus many parts of Europe is more than obvious. You definitely feel it. Castles. I must say there's nothing like looking down from castles and fortifications in Europe or looking up at them. Bastions from an age of aristocratic families who are bettering themselves for the next generation. Places of great conflict and battles over the great questions of prior ages. The great ideas and conflicts of human history, including the 30 and 100 years wars, all of whom are now surrounded by, I'm not kidding, Burger King, Kentucky Fried Chicken, McDonald's, and Starbucks. The Czech Republic in particular has a thing for KFC because the things are everywhere. While strolling about the main square of Salzburg, for you Sounds of Music fans, not to worry, there's a Starbucks right there in the square. I want all these places burned to the ground. Cars. While in Europe, I was texting V and Algo. The plethora of diesel cars across Europe was both welcome and equally made me emotional. What I would give for the chance to own a few of these delightful vehicles with great mileage and all-wheel drive. At one point, I came across the absolute manifestation of God's love in the form of a car. A Mercedes sports sedan with a 12-cylinder biturbo engine with intercoolers, who was black with black interior. Just the sound of its motor starting is enough to put fear in the gods from the ancient world. Oh, I don't know where you found that graphic, but thank you. Shout outs. My thanks as always to Knight for their postings on our Discord channel about all things nuclear technology, legislation around nuclear technology deployment, and private equity involvement in micro and macro nuclear development. It's a very important topic, and they know it better than I, and I appreciate their owning that one on Discord. Second, Aaron Apparent for a few zingers they posted, including, didn't I hear that one previously? Coverage of nuclear engines for spacecraft. I'm sarcastic about hearing of this tech previously because it's been actively researched since really the late 1960s and 70s. Various parties right now are acting like it's new, same as micronuclear reactors. Also, my thanks for the time and input of the folks I met on the nautical excursion while I was in Europe, and thank you for joining us, all of you who are now our new listeners. We're also glad to add you to our audience. Finders keepers, I have an update on the court case. Just to refresh, the FBI was forced to finally produce the evidence requested by the Treasure Group to the judge last July. Recall that I said the FBI gave the evidence to the judge in camera, meaning that the judge had to review it first and determine if it should be made public as part of the case. This is a time-wasting move. I've read the judge's order, and it's highly critical of the FBI. The judge said the information can be made public with some tiny exceptions. Second, they notified the FBI that the agency had failed to demonstrate that disclosure of the evidence would create a risk of circumvention of the law. That's what the judge said, nor why it should be protected from disclosure in this FOIA case. The judge issued a second order stating that once the U.S. government shutdown is over, attorneys from both sides within 7 days must file a joint status report. That report should indicate whether all records who were supposed to be produced in the judge's order from July of this year were in fact produced. If the attorneys agree, then the case can go forward. If finders keepers lawyers say the FBI is withholding or only produced partial information, I can only imagine the reaction by the judge. I will, of course, keep you up to date on this one. Tuesday, November 4th. The stories you've read regardless of conservative or liberal media sources about the events of November 4th are smoke and mirrors. Remember, to paraphrase a famous saying during World War II, quote, "Don't you realize there's a war on?" unquote. In the global conflict in which we find ourselves, the sides involved do agree on a few things, one of which is keeping us in the dark. First, do not misunderstand the Mamdani win in Manhattan. He's a plant by the London Corporation. He has no political backing from the traditional sources of power in that city, and for him to accomplish any of the promises that he's made requires approval from the New York State government. Will he get that support? Well, perhaps a few symbolic actions, but not on major items. Per V and Algo's input earlier this week, large-scale investments in New York in the form of new buildings have already been made. That wouldn't happen if the city were about to go free agency. Interestingly, can he be used to execute actions who no Democrat or Republican could ever pull off in New York? Yes. Will he? Well, we'll see. But is this guy going to tell the likes of Jamie Dimon how things are done in New York? No. Second, the elections in Minnesota did not turn out as expected. Third, a real sleeper, but supremely critical development. How many of you are aware in the previous 11 months, the new mayor of San Francisco has completely transformed? Democrat Mayor Lurie has created immense change in that city, most notably these last 2 months. They pulled the restraint off law enforcement, put prosecutors on notice to do their job, and had the city services start moving homeless and addicts to care centers and off the city streets. On the heels of public articles about the San Francisco turnaround, Nancy Pelosi has said she's not seeking re-election. I assure you those two realities about San Francisco are related. But there's more. Like New York, San Francisco is cleaning up the streets, fixing buildings, and there may be the beginnings of new construction. Many in San Francisco have said they thought this was impossible. More bluntly, the high net worth people up there finally put a stop to the stupidity. Just Thursday, Zero Hedge had an article about the immense pushback on woke ideologies in Silicon Valley. I don't see these events as quote unquote the public waking up to things who don't work. I see it as powerful people shutting them down and cutting off their money because whatever the goal was, it's been achieved. Will something similar occur in New York? Who knows? To paraphrase Ben Franklin, a nation of shopkeepers is seldom disinterested in what goes on in the country. Said in Veles language, billionaires, even if they're aligned with the global elites, will repair situations in their own hometowns when it's in their interest to do so. Please stay tuned. Hey, V. Paging Mr. Gorilla.
Hey, sorry about that. Hey, guys, how are you?
Yes,
Hey.
I had to mute your mic, V, because it was messing up what Veles was saying, so apologies for that.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
Charlie Kirk asking for a friend. Where's Charlie Kirk's autopsy? When will the autopsy be? Who's conducting it? Where will he be buried, and when is the funeral? Officially, he's supposed to be buried in Phoenix, but what's the status on that? I mean, his widow needs to know so she can pick out the correct pair of tight leather pants for that media event.
Oh yeah.
I'm just speaking as a pundit, folks, because his funeral, if it was soon after his death, would have been the biggest conservative gathering since Ronald Reagan's inauguration, yet nothing. What about the autopsies on the various shooters during the last year? We haven't seen those either. If you loved 9/11, wait till you see what's behind the broader picture around Charlie, his wife, and others. Oh, and then there's this one. Charlie Kirk's chief of staff, Mikey McCoy, has said he was running and calling people after the shooting, telling them he was covered in blood, yet all photos of him show not a drop of blood on him. Nothing dies on the internet. Grooming. Over at Crazy Days and Nights is an uncomfortable series of videos reminding us of scrubbed history of George Clooney, Jerry Seinfeld, Nick Jonas, and others involved. I won't use the word dating with minors. I would note several of these folks traveled with these underage girls across state lines, who's a federal crime. It's not just men either, as Carolyn Flack, the well-known British TV presenter, was involved with a 17-year-old guy. Of course, in 2020, she was found dead from, say it with me, suicide. It goes on and on. The media folks in the public spotlight. Let the blackmail begin. The rabbit hole does indeed go far. There's a conspiracy or ritual. We'll delve into the New York mayoral elections a little later. Prior to that, though, and from the land of mysteries and things, we have the following. I'm not saying this means anything. I'm just pointing it out. Dick Cheney died this week, who was the vice president during the 9/11 attacks. Mayor Mamdani, a South African Muslim, and that religion was associated with the hijackers during those attacks. The UPS plane who crashed this week was flight number 2976, and the number of casualties on 9/11, if you remove the hijackers themselves, was 2,976 or 2977, depending on which source you ask. The accident occurred at the Muhammad Ali Airport in Kentucky. One of the hijackers was named Muhammad Atta. The Louisville mayor said at the time of the accident, 9 people were killed and 11 injured. But wait, there's more. The aircraft who crashed was originally a passenger jet before it was reclassified as a cargo jet. The length of time, according to FAA records, from the shift from a passenger service to classified as a cargo plane was 9 years and 11 days to the time of the accident. The UPS aircraft had only reached 175 feet before it crashed, and one of the flight numbers of the planes on 9/11 was United Flight 175, who struck the South Tower. But remember, this is all coincidence. Main course. What are the correlations between Harry Markopolos, the events of 2008, and the recent activity with NVIDIA and AI firms? And at the end of this one, if V and Algo would care to comment, that would be fantastic. So I'm stepping into V and Algo's domain a bit. In February of 2009, Harry Markopolos, an American forensic accounting and financial fraud investigator and former securities industry executive, testified to Congress. His name had risen to the top of the pile as Congress was compelled to hold hearings about Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. What they didn't expect was a man described as a hero to financial experts went after everyone during his testimony. His testimony was also devoid of the sort of formality we tend to see in these sorts of hearings, especially when you're dealing with a friendly witness. He was mad, and he had reason to be. For roughly 10 years, he'd been filing complaints about why the SEC had not investigated Bernie Madoff. His testimony railed against systemic failures of regulators at multiple agencies and was littered with facts, documentation, and dates of his filings with those agencies, who in turn caused very uncomfortable follow-on testimony from those same agencies and some resignations. Just a reminder about public hearings in government. Making statements about your frustrations or agency failures is one thing, but when you show up with paperwork with signatures, that usually requires those same agencies to have to show up and rebut what you said. In his opening remarks, Harry made one of the more interesting statements I've ever encountered in government testimony. He directly spoke to organized crime figures globally, saying he was looking out for their interests as much as traditional investors. Smug congresspeople said to Markopolos they were sure such figures understood his message or words to that effect. That only angered Harry, who stated those figures needed to understand he was looking out for their interests as much as other people. Harry went on to explain the reason being organized crime usually seeks abnormal returns in their investments because they're outside the law. He didn't want them to misunderstand that somehow Harry's efforts were what caused Madoff's empire to fail, the result of which cost them a lot of money. Said another way, he didn't want to get killed. That's the key takeaway. They're a community of people who seek unnatural financial returns in their investments. Thanks, Algo. There's another community or group who seeks unnatural returns on investments because they can get away with it. That being several global intelligence agencies. We'll touch upon the importance of that in a moment. I would add there's one group beyond various forms of organized crime who want unnatural... Among other factors in the events of the 2008 recession or depression were things not covered in the media. The first being South American organized crime pulled enough money out of the markets to begin triggering the collapse. The second notable item is Antonio Maria Costa, the former head of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, said in 2009 that around $350 billion of liquidity was provided to struggling banks during the crisis to keep them solvent. This included banks in Mexico. Again, protecting the means to sustain unnatural financial returns by keeping certain key financial institutions functioning. Therefore, this is why when it comes to movies like The Big Short, who we often cite on Rogue, there's always more to the story. Why would organized crime pull money out of the markets the way it is believed they did in 07 and 08? Because they were no longer achieving unnatural returns on their investments. Then in the last few months, we've reached unnatural on a whole new level, given the sums involved in the various back and forth investments among NVIDIA, OpenAI, AMD, Oracle, Microsoft, and Intel, to name a few. Even fanboys in the realm of Silicon Valley find those recent transactions suspect. Further, are the valuations on the companies involved based on reality in any way? Does that matter if the right people are, say it with me, achieving unnatural returns on their investments, especially given the fact that the intelligence community is most probably involved? With that, V and Algo, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, sure. I shared a video from Jack Gamble with you guys, although I shared it like late yesterday, so you guys had time to watch it. But he does a really good job of talking about this, and I even forget the term he used, but it's like what's happened with NVIDIA, and some companies around it. Is like you open a lemonade stand for your daughter, you give her $50, and she sells one glass of lemonade to a neighbor, and then the dad buys the other 9, and you have some production. 10 glasses sold, and so they double the investment. They want to show that 20 glasses were sold, but only one goes to the neighbor. The dad buys the other 19.
Right.
And then the dad talks to the uncle, and they put in, $1,000, and they've sold, hundreds of glasses, but only really 1 or 2 real sales happen. And then all of a sudden they take the lemonade company public, showing thousands and thousands sold, even though it was the dad and the uncle who bought it all. And that's kind of the basic version of what's going on with these companies. Very simplified.
V?
Sorry about that. No, I agree with what you guys have to say. I don't have anything to add to that.
Cool. Okay. We're being manipulated. Please hear me out on the following content, as I'm going to delve into some topics that does affect people's emotions. In several media sources, and especially in social media, we're being manipulated on a specific topic to hide intended influence. We have to continue to be mindful and aware of what's happening to us. For years, I've watched college students from the 1980s to now protesting the policies of the government of the folks in the Levant. Again, my normal guidance: the government of the Levant, not the Jewish people or the Jewish faith. I have the same discussion with people from South America to the effect, yes, I know my country's intelligence agencies and corporations sent those death squads, but killing the average American doesn't fix that reality. Note on a prior program regarding the Vietnam War, protests in the U.S. went on for nearly 10 years. Various forms of peaceful and violent protests occurred in the U.S. during that time. Violence in one manifestation via groups like the Weather Underground, whose violence was more against the fabric of the country than the Vietnam War specifically. I'm dead serious when I say that at my Midwestern university in the early 1990s, I had professors who would smile and nod while looking up at the ceiling should some student mention the Weatherman organization in a class discussion. Anyway, Nearly 10 years of street and other forms of protest, and not a single foreign policy change, not a military change, and further examples of being ineffective. Oh, and even the paragon of protest schools on the West Coast were in fact ground zero of MK Ultra programs and various human engineering. If only those protesting students back then knew their true enemy was on their own campus in the building next door. That's no joke. Regarding those years, let us also recall what we now know about who was running Charles Manson. So what does this have to do with the government intelligence agencies of the Levant? Like I said, I saw firsthand through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s the years of protests on college campuses as well as media criticism of that country. That's nearly 40 years of protests of the policies of the government of that country. But yet on no single occasion did all of that activity result in a single change by that government, its military, or its intelligence agencies. So then I have to ask, are all those protests a clever way to vent frustration by people marching around with placards thinking they're making a change? You're a college student. You're supposed to be learning something. If the generations before you were ineffective, you might want to try another approach. Maybe engineering or business schools could help you understand outcome-based planning. Then we had that well-organized campus encampment activity in the spring of 2024. That item has gone down the memory hole unless you're a federal investigator or prosecutor trying to squeeze money, concessions, or both from various universities. Of course, because I knew people on the ground at several schools during those protests, the media narrative is also disinformation. You see, many of the schools had policies who, if followed or enforced, would have prevented the days of encampments and campus damage. The protests could have taken place, guaranteeing their First Amendment rights, but not to the degree of what occurred. So what happened? Well, here's a clue. More than 70% of the protesters at those schools, in some situations the number's even higher, were paid to be there. More than paid, they were also trained, provided legal support, and coordinated by others. The protests in 2024 were by people with long records with law enforcement, years of being paid in cash, and no job prospects other than this kind of activity. Please recall our prior programs where we've shown there are standing armies on U.S. soil of paid activists who can be called up at a moment's notice, versus what the media points your attention to, which is people of Mexican or South American extraction, Somalis or others, saying they're going to overthrow the government. The best part of all this? These protesters could be paid to switch sides quite easily, as they have no future in the modern economy. If you caught Tom Luongo's program on Rogue earlier this week, he touched upon this at a general level in the U.S. Beyond the protesters, how are they able to set up on those campuses without being stopped? Ooh, now we're getting somewhere. In the case of at least two major universities, who I can't name, the school leadership was overruled, in one example by the state's government, and I know that factually. Yet another reminder of how compromised many U.S. government officials. Speaking of compromise, last Saturday, a former chancellor of Syracuse said he can now publicly state the truth about the encampments. Ready? The protesters were all agents of Iran. And if you believe that, I have a bridge I want to sell you. Boy, this wouldn't be because East Coast universities are trying to play nice with the people pumping medical and weapons money through those schools for the folks in the Levant, would it? Particularly given the fact we at Rogue are one of the few alternative sources who identified the group A15 or Alpha 15 out of Switzerland, who is the hub of the campus planning efforts. Last I checked, the middle of Europe is nowhere near Persia. These actions by universities for and against certain protests and U.S. government officials becoming apologists for a foreign country have reached absurd lengths and have created massive resentment in many parts of the United States. But let us also recall what the protests were about. They were protesting the carnage in Gaza by that government in the Levant, as well as military spending by both the U.S. and Levant governments at those schools. Again, that government and not its citizens or the religious community connected to that country. In many cases, there were counter-protesters arguing that criticism of the policies in Gaza is an attack on the Jewish community. Though many members of those counter-protests believe that to be true, the counter-protests were, say it with me, often led by well-funded and organized individuals, some of whom were Alpha 15. As the old saying goes, it always comes down to money and logistics. Those nationwide events across the U.S. required a lot of both. Equally, a lot of resources to shut the media down from any real digging into what occurred. Coming full circle, we've had years of growing resentment and anger for a variety of reasons aimed at the Levant. That constant boil has now manifested itself in some surprising content all over social media. I'm surprised because, as we're fond of pointing out on previous attempts by Rogue to post certain content, we found our stuff always scrubbed and removed. Now, whether it's YouTube, X, or other social media, it's now in vogue to claim Hitler was misunderstood. There are reasons the Jewish community is not liked anywhere they go, and the age-old favorite, the Jews are behind everything. I say this with a sense of gallows humor, because they were saying it was the Masons and the Illuminati in 2023, and now we're back to hating the Jewish community. Yes, every religion, race, ethnic group, nation, and sports team has reasons for hating others, or at a minimum preferring to stay out of those areas of town. Seriously, does it not strike you as strange these frenzies are pushed on us like clockwork based on the outcome they want? There's a bit of dialogue in the old Star Trek where a being who thrives on violence compels the crew of the Enterprise to fight constantly with Klingons. This is an episode called Day of the Dove. When both sides realized they were being played, the Klingon commander Kang makes the famous statement to the energy being, "Out. We don't need any urging to hate humans. But for the present, only a fool would fight in a burning house. Get out." Yes, 1960s dialogue, but something we should consider is that little energy being is using social media to keep us attacking each other instead of seeing the real situation and the real adversaries. I've seen something subtle in recent social media narratives. This is not about whether the events of the 1930s and 40s in Germany occurred the way history says they did. Genuine debate about those details of those years I leave to historians and investigative researchers. My point is, we're demonizing a people for the actions of their government and intelligence agencies. The people did not commit those acts. Their government and intelligence agencies gave the order, often against their own people while we're at it. This is that horrendous joke from history where legal doctrine in Germany changed the law to create group guilt in the 1930s. Group accountability for the actions of an entire group because of the actions of a few. No kidding, this is why university academics in contemporary times found themselves arguing by pandering to white guilt and other evils. Similarly, am I going to blame every Argentinian or loyalist Salvadoran for the slaughter of what occurred in those countries due to their government's actions in the 70s and 80s? Is every Cambodian going to be another Pol Pot every time your Uber driver happens to be from that country? This is the equivalent of what's floating around social media. As I said, though, there's a subtlety. As efforts are underway to rewrite history, there are other historical truths being erased. Like what, you asked? Well, by opening the door to revisionism with the Nazis, we're erasing other fun topics from that era. Social media is reducing and removing discussions of eugenics. They're removing racial and physical engineering of human beings in those years. They're removing social engineering. They're removing the Fabians. And they're removing population reduction through immigration and emigration as weapons globally by governments pursuing racial cleansing. First, let us remember it wasn't the Nazis who produced those ideas. It was Tavistock on behalf of the London Corporation. And they ran a lot of that experimentation here in the United States. If you ever want to scare the crap out of yourself, go check the government records on how many people we forcibly sterilized in the United States in the 30s. Sterilized because a government bureaucrat felt you came from poverty or the wrong race, or there's enough of you already. Ironically, who were the two biggest states for those synergies? Ironic given their politics? Indiana and California. What did Hermann Goering say at Nuremberg? Nazi Germany was following the existing legal and scientific template established by the United States and others prior to the war. Second, where does that lead us? In my opinion, while certain parties are reinterpreting the 30s and the 40s, the most dangerous ideas of those years are being hidden. They're being hidden because a portion of the world's elites still want that engineered world. Their first attempt by leveraging Nazi Germany failed. Equally, recall also, Germany wasn't their first choice. It was the United States. But by the grace of God, General Smedley Butler didn't carry out his order on behalf of U.S. elites to turn America into a fascist country and overthrow FDR. A nasty situation as well, as FDR was no prince either. Just ask his wife and her secretary. As I speak to you now, social media is leveraging emotion, anger, and frustration of our compromised government leaders as energy they can direct. To direct that energy towards a religious and ethnic community who do not have the power to stop the government of the Levant's actions any more than the average American can stop our own government. In my opinion, to keep safe a plethora of their next interests, including this one. As many of you may be aware, the Canadian government has continued to expand euthanasia wholesale. Not just people with terminal illnesses, but even teenagers who don't feel like life is working out for them. Last I checked, that's what being a teenager is, feeling like life isn't working out for you. This is a piece of what you may not have heard. You see, those medical euthanasia centers in Canada, under what they call their MAID program, M-A-I-D, are harvesting the organs of the people who died for a profit. International agencies have pointed out that organs from end-of-life programs, that's what they call government-sponsored euthanasia, organs from end-of-life programs are the biggest growing source of organs internationally. For the eugenics crowd, pardon, they like to call themselves transhumanists now, they see this as a win-win. They remove from society people who aren't of any value, and they give their organs to people who will be or could be. Or maybe you're a friend of the Clintons or the Bush family and you need a liver. In the U.S. at present, wholesale euthanasia clinics have not arrived yet, though I would point out the state of Illinois on October 31st, ironic given the date, passed state legislation authorizing euthanasia for the terminally ill. I do expect it will continue to be rolled out in other Commonwealth countries like Australia and New Zealand. I'm also sure the London Corporation continues to feel there's still too many Scots in Scotland, and my folks up there will have their work cut out for them. Many other dangerous ideas and programs are being kicked around in Silicon Valley. These are straight up 1930s social and human engineering, and this time they want the technology crowd to roll them out. Keep your eyes on the glowing ball in the corner of the enterprise making us fight and hate each other, and know that it's distracting us from reality. Europe ponderings. In the last year, I've covered a lot of Europe in a short period of time. Last summer, it was Switzerland, Italy, France, and Spain. No, I wasn't in Davos, but I was in Geneva and Bern, and I saw the biggest foreign embassy I've ever seen in a foreign country, in the city of Geneva being China. Then in the time I was away, the last 2 weeks, I covered the Czech Republic, Germany, Austria, Slovakia, and Hungary. I provided photos of myself having coffee in a public square in Salzburg, to which Algo asked me, "Are you spiriting someone out of Constantinople again?" Good one, Algo. That's 9 countries in 1 year, folks, by plane, car, bus, and boat, and train. Frankly, it was the sort of real estate coverage I used to dream about in college. I probably would not have appreciated it to the degree I do now, or probably not with this perspective. So once again, always trust in the Lord and never push the Lord's timetable. I've met a lot of people, and I know my critics would say, well, Veles, it's not like you met anybody in their governments or major banks. No, and I never said I did. I encountered a very chatty U.S. embassy official in Geneva who probably should have lost his job, not because he spoke to me, but because in a public park he was very loud about his prior discussions with the White House. All I could think of at the time was, you know, you're a security risk and there's a river right here if someone wants to do something about it. Let that be a corrective action for U.S. government officials wandering around foreign capitals thinking no one is hearing your conversations. I was in your blind spot, bro, and you never saw me even as you entered the hotel lobby. So back to the folks I've met. The same people I always counted on when I was in South America. Waiters, taxi drivers, Uber drivers, bartenders, hotel managers, hotel staff, and private tour guides. The kind who are only taking you from point A to B with a group of no more than 4 people or just you and the occasional shopkeeper. Given the degree to which intelligence reports often contain misleading information, my sources of these situations can be more accurate. Some specifics include the Czech Republic and Hungary, who are EU members, but are using their native currencies and not the euro. This is not for the same reasons why some EU members retained their currencies. These countries want to be on the euro as their currency, but the EU believes their economies are too weak. That's kind of ironic given the fact that Greece, who's an EU member and has use of the euro, yet Greece is also the only EU member legally allowed to include prostitution and black market and untaxed cigarettes as part of their GDP to hit their figures. By the way, I would point out that I have many Greek friends in the United States, and they do not have a problem with my saying that. Anyway, from southern Germany to the Czech Republic to Slovakia to Hungary, there are cranes dotted throughout main cities and small towns. Active efforts to build new buildings as well as restore their legacy infrastructure. The economy of Hungary is really struggling, and many people pointed this out to me. Why does it matter among the countries I saw? Well, first, Hungary has opposed EU decisions strenuously, and it's impacted their economy hard. The second is Hungary is part of the, the Visegrad group, which includes themselves, Romania, Poland, and the Czech Republic. That group can loosely be described as being an Eastern European equivalent of the Mercosur bloc in South America. It therefore makes sense Hungary is under such immense pressure by the EU. During my late October travels, I noted how much tour leaders or private guides discussed how much they don't like politicians of any party. The old saying about their being useless. There are people in the United States right now who would make Trotsky uncomfortable given the degree to which they actually believe their own political parties, especially in New York, the Northeast, and California, much less Texas and Florida. It made me chuckle because if I could get everybody into a room and step up to the lectern, my first question would be to point out the obvious. Doesn't that strike you as strange? Seriously, does that not strike you as strange? All of us? 9 European countries and well-educated people along with your friends in America, and despite our cultures, our political parties, and everything that makes us who we are, the one thing we all can agree on is our politicians are useless. Doesn't that seem strange? I'm not suggesting they're rocket scientists, but by the laws of physics, they can't all be idiots. I used to fly back from Washington, D.C. to my home state, often sitting next to a congressperson or a senator, and they were often quite intelligent. But to keep this within the realm of the rogue belief system and plutocratic study, you could also see the puppeteer's strings. More bluntly, and especially in our content the last 2 years, if you have any political or economic influence or importance in this country, you're blackmailed. You're blackmailed into your next 6 reincarnations. And that is the key point we often say here on Rogue. Our government officials and those of the countries I've seen, it's the same pattern. They're all blackmailed and compromised. Again, my theme on these programs regarding you, our audience, being better informed and more self-aware than some of the most powerful people on earth. I'm not joking and I'm not placating you. I'm quite serious when I say that. It's one of the most important statements I could ever make to all of you as human sentient beings. On a deep spiritual level, we need to be in tune with the universe first and foremost, more than filing FOIAs about what our elites are up to, although I'm a strong believer in those FOIAs. Or to quote some Christian theology, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. There's an old joke among fathers about all things you might do in life, that the one thing you cannot fail at doing is keeping a daughter, or a son for that matter, off a stripper pole. I have nothing against exotic dancers. It's just when it comes to your own kids, there are other career options. Likewise, as sentient beings, the one thing we cannot fail at doing is avoiding becoming an NPC, that being a non-playing character in a video game who serves little to no purpose. In this thing called life, we have to avoid having lives as NPCs. Whatever happens to our elites or politicians will happen, and many of them have become NPCs anyway. So while I'm in this reflective state of mind, I also rode a bike through a park in Vienna last week. For those of you who remember, you'll recall the significance of that phrase. Are we in a meeting in Vienna at this moment? Well, it depends on the country you're living in right now. For most of us, no, but in some ways it may feel that way. But I will say, given the importance of a meeting in Vienna or a park in Vienna, for those of you who know the meaning, it was very surreal to find myself slowly gliding through that park, watching park bench after park bench, given the history of what happened there. Other Europe observations. I'm thankful to have encountered many young people in these countries, whether hiking up a mountain, in cafes, or in the streets of their various countries. They look like young people should. Oh, sure, some have colored hair, but that's not what I'm talking about. They act and behave like kids their age, except for the cultural differences. None of them are like the unfortunate examples in several U.S. high schools right now of kids who identify as felines and are asking where their cat box is. Sadly, for many of these Central European kids, they have relatives who lived through communism and no doubt have instilled a sense of reality. Let that be another reminder, my friends, a healthy sense of hardship or community service can keep entitlement at bay. As you hear me mention often as a person of half Eastern European background, I can feel and relate to many current Central Europeans. That being an immense understanding of their recent and long-term history and loosely said what they've been through. This is why I have a much deeper understanding and appreciation for the Visegrad group I mentioned earlier, a vision of trying to carve out a Central European reality free of NATO and Russia. Even an average citizen in these countries knows their history, and in some cases, what they know goes back hundreds of years. They can cite it from memory. It's more than just history, though. It's their identity. You hear the names of German states like Bavaria, and some might try to explain that away as the equivalent of Texas in the U.S. a statement whose wildly a bad comparison. There was a time within the last 150 years when the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Serbia, Bosnia, and others were simply states within larger powers. Now they're independent, and they want to keep it that way. I met people from each of those countries as their name tags have flags of their national origin. This is the fundamental flaw with Western European thinking at present. France has struggled for 20 years to integrate Arab and North African people into their society against the logic of the statement, why wouldn't you want to be part of French history and Enlightenment civilization? Thanks, Algo. It's easy to agree with pundits who say words to the effect, well, you know how Muslims, Arabs, and North Africans are. That being a cover for social frictions in Europe. That's not only a shortcut to thinking, but violently wrong. First, they have their own identity. In the case of France, they know they're cheap labor and nothing more. Second, and worse, to many of those people, it's an insult as they know they will never truly be accepted as French any more than Britain's government will ever seriously take anyone from India. For that matter, Turkey's deep understanding, no matter what they do, the European Union will never let them in. The EU trying to sell their ideology to Eastern Europeans is comedy at best. They've heard the promise of great powers before, and because they know their history, they know where that will lead. This subject goes deeper than that, though, and it goes to the heart of several conflicts globally. The world's elites and apex elites are believers in the global feudalist vision, centralized control and direction by enlightened global elites like themselves, now fortified with new and improved technology, of whom we're certain this time our goal of global government will work. Said another way, if you enjoyed the old socialism, you'll love the new socialism enhanced by Silicon Valley. Some of the frictions we're witnessing globally are not what the media says they are. They are the fact the globalist vision is either unable to deliver on its promises, or they're selling them to people who simply will not go back to that world. They'll join your European Union until such time as it no longer suits them. More likely it comes to an inevitable conclusion of failure. Ergo, why would Central Europeans, as part of joining the EU, have ever created the Visegrad Group in the first place if the goal was solely to join the EU? They created something like it because they know it's going to fail, and they want something to fall back on. It's why the nationalist identity of these countries is such a thorn in the side of the globalists. They want Bavarians, much less Czechs and Slovaks, to accept being a tourist reference with your headset telling you about why an old castle or fortification was important, because it's all ancient history to the globalists. What the globalists won't accept is we're talking about the soul of the people of these countries. Many Americans will be shocked to discover in a number of these countries and provinces I've encountered stories who sound sadly familiar to the United States. Boys, give me one moment. I'll be right back.
I guess Veles is Constantinopolian, rescue got out.
I'm back.
Did your Constantinopolian rescue cat get out, or?
No, I had somebody at the door. I was channeling my inner V. Hang on. Where was I? Oh, yes. I've encountered a number of Europeans while I was over there who have stories similar to what many of us in the United States have heard. Families who have not been speaking to each other for years. And it's not due to some ancient hatred or because somebody in the family married somebody from the wrong religion. They're not speaking to each other regarding whether they agreed with the coup shots or other topics. And they're also split on whether they can trust the EU. It breaks my heart to see Eastern Europeans arguing with one another because they fought communism so that they could make their own decisions without being dictated to by their governments. But conversely, the other side argues it's for that very reason they should go along with their new central governments because this time it's run by better people. The point I'm trying to convey is these aren't simply normal disagreements inside a country prior to an election, nor are they some of the historical classics in Europe to the equivalent of, we never did like those hill people. From my view, these are intentionally created divisions, most probably thanks to our friends at Tavistock. Equally, there's a subtle reality for many people in Europe, no different in the US or Canada right now. That being, I was correct to go along with whatever decision I made in the past, because to admit I made a mistake both bankrupts any future decisions I make, and it means I have to admit I was played. So I have to justify my decision, no matter how wrong I may have been. Please see all the white Karens attending the No Kings demonstrations a month ago. Even more simply, the people screwing with us globally, regardless of our national identities, religions, and beliefs, are playing upon the most ancient and predictable of human weaknesses. That's awesome, Alga. They're playing on fear. To quote Al Pacino from The Devil's Advocate, vanity, definitely my favorite sin. This is a central focus for many of us in management consulting to confront the demon. We cannot make decisions based on our historical or even new fears. To quote from Dune, fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see the path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. We have to awaken to the reality that many, not all, of our fears right now are manufactured. These aren't our fears. They're fears the apex elites are instilling in us to keep us distracted. To quote from the Christian faith, be not afraid. The Lord your God is with you. And if God is on your side, who can be against you? Standing armies and apex elite handlers. With all the talk of the left or Soros-funded people and related topic matter on X and similar platforms, remember the following. A lot of the volumes of money who was once directed by Lord Malik Brown from the London Corporation, of whom Soros and his son are minions, that money has been seriously curtailed. It's why the No Kings rallies were such a fizzle. There are two sides to that money, and this is an important takeaway. The money we know has been cut off, and the other funds that have also been cut, but we have no visibility. Knowledge of the source of those funds, not discussed in the media, is the kind of thing who can get you killed. So suffice to say, many things are going on. This is one piece of many on the drug interdiction with Venezuela and Colombia currently. We could have shut down the drug trade, or at least delivered a massive blow to it in the late 1970s via a federal agency named CENTAC, C-E-N-T-A-C, where it was a division, actually, of drug enforcement. Finding out about CENTAC is nearly impossible, except for a little-known book, of whom, yes, Veles has a copy that I read back in college. CENTAC was targeting narcotics organizations via military-like thinking. They had a numerical department number for each trafficking group being targeted, so it was along the lines of CENTAC Group 7, Group 13, etc. Each group number was assigned to traffickers like the former nationalist Chinese general running heroin out of Burma. For you fans of the TV show from the 1980s Miami Vice, there was an episode who alluded to that with a villain known as General Lao Li. There was a group assigned to the traffickers out of Morocco, Colombia, and the list goes on. So what happened? CENTAC was shut down the minute Ronald Reagan took office. That's not a pro or con Republican or Democrat item, folks. Reagan was forced to do it by the CIA. We could have shut down trafficking many times in the last few decades, but such efforts were always stopped. Recall one of the supposed backstories about why the Pan Am flight was blown up over Scotland. Yet now we're blowing up drug boats. Why now and why not all of them? There are a lot of drug boats coming into the U.S., and we're blowing up some high-profile boats and putting it on NBC and CNN. I ask again, why now and not the last 40 years? Because money from that trafficking in some situations is being funneled to London Corporation and others. Let me say that again. We're blowing up a few boats using military assets. That's a message. If we were blowing up all of them, that would be something else. Plus, don't forget, the reason why government officials in Venezuela and Colombia are losing their cookies over this is not because that's their money getting blown up. It's some of their money, but it's because powerful people's money and drug lord money is getting blown up. Those government officials are not screaming at the U.S. because we blew up fishing vessels. It's their lives, folks. Their lives are being threatened by people who know how to do it, and that's not just them. It's every child they have and relative they have. This is the old TV trope about the people threatening these government officials know 100 ways worse than death to hurt you. Those officials have children, loved ones, nephews, nieces who can be kidnapped off U.S. college campuses and tortured. So those officials being threatened in terrifying ways, that's why those governments are screaming at the United States. Equally, don't doubt the narcotics trafficking will continue one way or another, as there's just too much money involved. The laundering for certain parties is what will stop. Concluding quote for today. From the book The Great Gatsby is an important quote, something I've reflected on many times since I first read it in middle school. And it's also because I've met so many wealthy people in my life, as well as senior executives. Not all of them, but there is a class of them for which this quote applies. and I quote, "They were careless people. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they made." Unquote. Ironically, the British royal family is trying to clean up Andrew and Harry right now, and it's not because of Epstein. That's just a distraction. I yield the floor, gentlemen.
Excuse me. Got a lot of frog in the throat moments here. With the beef, I have a very good friend of mine, going back many years, who I don't want to say what company he works for, but perhaps like one of the biggest fast food companies in the country. He's got a high position there. Some of his comments on also regarding beef and why, it's costing so much money. I'm reading it here. Cattle cycles, cattle inventory from low to high to low are roughly 10 years long. So 5 years to go from low to high. Heavy drop period 2020 to 2022/23 caused ranchers to sell off a lot of their inventory as feed costs more than grass. The Mexican cattle, large source of live cattle for the U.S. ban. So the Mexican cattle ban that began late last year also restricted the much needed inventory. There's no indication of when these live cattle shipments will resume. There are also, I believe, outside of what he was saying, was some culling. I believe there was culling of the herds based on supposed diseases, things like that. Cattle, I think cows can have one calf per year, and half those calves or half those are female.
Yep.
So yeah, it takes quite a while for the population to regenerate. Gosh, I mean, if you only slaughter the males and then you keep all the females, and then it's another, let me see, do the math on that. It's another 2 to 3 years before you've even replaced, a portion of the population. So it's a pretty brutal business when it comes to regeneration of herds. It's like one of the reasons that we're seeing all that. Actually, I think it just gave 3 or 4.
The analogy that's been shared with me is livestock in many respects is the same sort of timing as coffee, because coffee bean takes like 5 years to mature before you can even start harvesting anything.
Yeah,
and then
kava.
You got to dry it out and all that, and it takes time. It's a very time intensive industry.
Yeah, kava root's the same thing, which is a popular nutraceutical. But the other thing I was going to bring up was AI on the workforce. That same video that I told you about from Jack Campbell, he was talking about how they've actually done a study. I forget the number, but there's a lot of work slop. So we all know the term AI slop, right? It's just, crap that they do and put on the internet, art that's clearly AI, that's not that great. Well, there's a lot of work slop. And you got all these people who are, churning in documents for their job that were literally, made by AI, lots of mistakes. And the amount of time it takes either those same employees or other employees to go over and fix all the mistakes is taking more time than if they had simply done the work in the first place manually. So, the dream of AI and all this replacing, I'm sure there are processes. I know there are. AI saves me a decent amount of time in my work. It's not useless, but there is also a loss to society. And quite frankly, there is supposedly there's a link from overuse of AI to a loss of cognitive function as well. So
yes, that and there's a social health impact for those who've been using AI. We covered this on a prior Rogue show, folks. The sadly, people that are so lonely, they've developed relationships with AI relationship tools.
Oh yeah, somebody was. The Nick Fuentes Tucker Carlson interview, which I'd recommend everybody watch. Nick Fuentes says some really strange things out there. I don't want to get too far into it, but one of the comments he made was because someone actually tried to kill him. Showed up, someone doxed him, and someone showed up at his door to try to kill him, and that person had killed his roommate and their parents right before they came to his house, and they got him. Obviously, Nick Fuentes is still alive. But they were talking about the reasons for a lot of the mental health, right? And Tucker even went so far as to say, hey, he says, I don't want to be a conspiracy guy, but is it that a lot of these mentally unstable people are used by the government for these operations? And Nick Fuentes was like, oh, I don't know, maybe. I mean, this guy might have been just crazy. And he named a lot of the reasons there are mental health issues. And among them was people talking to chatbots all day long as if they are a person because they're so
Yes.
lonely. And I agree with Rob. I mean, Rob B, SSRIs, huge issue. But anyway, I don't want to get too far down that path. But yes, just another comment.
And if I may, we've been here before, folks, and I've passed this along on some other programs. We've been here before. For those of us, I hate to go there, but I've recently been in discussions with veterans I know, not military, veterans of the IT industry, veterans of consulting, veterans of the private sector. Because I hate to say it, but for those of us who've been around this long, we're watching what's going on right now with layoffs and adjustments at various corporations. And we all have a very strong gallows humor right now about, oh, this feels so familiar. Because it's 1998, it's 2001, it's 2008 all over again. And the big one in 2001 was the Sims game and similar games. When huge numbers of people got laid off just to kind of pass the time, they started playing those games. And because their characters were able to develop in the game a happy family, a happy life, accomplishments, etc., they stopped applying for jobs. They found meaning in their life through a video game rather than trying to I'm not laughing, but trying to deal with life the way it is. And this is we're going down that road again, unfortunately. But
I have a buddy that I went to university with. He made a killing on Second Life, which is basically one of the sim games. During that period, he just did really well.
Now, not to be a market watcher, and this is definitely more Algo and V's territory than my own. We've obviously had a lot of activity the last couple of days, both due to and in spite of everything concerning the budget, airline cancellations, news from industry, and so on. I can't get into specifics. I'm hearing things that Monday or next week, we're probably going to have some other stories floating about corporate changes. On a future program, I will be having an in-depth, maybe half the program, on career hunting stuff, basically tools, websites, how to do it, what to look out for, etc. Because I know a number of you probably would like to hear that. But the other part of it is let's up the toolkit, folks, and get some weapons in your quiver to deal with the world we're living in. And as always, get some exercise, go take a long walk, even if the weather's a little off. And don't. I mean, it's easy to say, don't let this stuff get you down. We've been here before. That doesn't make it easy. But there's tools and techniques to deal with this. And as we open the program, whether it's Algo's offerings or Gus or just the content that V and all the rest of us provide, we've got your back. V, anything for you, sir?
No, man. Great show as always, brother.
Yes, Veles will not be going. Veles, oh, that's awesome. Veles will not be going back to Europe for some time, I don't think.
You were talking about castles. I was trying to find that graphic.
Your mother smells of elderberries.
Your father was your mother was a hamster. Fart in your general direction, you silly English nugget.
A coconut. Here, coconuts are native to the Caribbean. Oh, another film that if you knew the history, folks, of that film, they barely got it done. It was on a shoestring budget. Half the time they didn't know what the hell they were doing. I mean, it's truly the universe interceded and made sure that film got made.
One of the best in history. V, the gorilla, give us that.
Yeah, thank you all for listening in. We will be back Monday. Keep it locked and loaded right here, roguenews.com. Take it away, Cowboy.